All right, guys, I hope everybody's doing well today. In this video, I'd just like to focus on demographics and how important they are in addition to other data points and really evaluating what's going on in any given housing market in the country. But for purposes of this video, I'm going to focus on my hometown of Nashville and more specifically Davidson County, which is really the heart of the MSA, um, to sort of prove a point here. So, as I've said in previous videos, it's really hard to make a case that there is a housing shortage at a national level. And I've also been, full transparency, I want to make it clear that because you observe something at a national level does not mean the distribution of homes is going to be uh, equal across the country. That's irrational to think so. So there may, even at a national level, we it looks like, hey, we may have oversupply of homes. Well, that may not be the case in various markets across the country. So let's see if we can sort of perform that same analysis at a granular level. And I've seen this done for census regions, for even states, and even MSAs. But to really make this a meaningful sort of analysis, the more granular you can get with it, the better. So let's focus on this top chart, which is housing units per capita. And the way that that's calculated is it's the aggregate housing stock. Okay, that gets divided into the population. So housing units divided by the population, and that's the entire population for Davidson County. The housing stock again is renter occupied units, owner occupied units, and vacant units. So what we're doing is we're capturing the entire stock of homes, not just a segment of it, the entire stock of homes. And that's important because people, again, they have the option to either rent or own. So looking at segments in isolation is not the appropriate way to determine whether or not there is a housing shortage or a surplus. Okay, so let's look at this bottom chart, and all I've done is basically I'm dissecting the components that go into the housing units per capita chart up top. And this tells me, at least near term, that the housing stock is outgrowing the population. Well, people might stop there, and I think that that is incredibly short-sighted. So let's dig into why that may be the case. So I'm going to move on to another sort of dashboard that I have. And what we're doing here is we're looking at the average household size of owner occupied units for various counties, including Davidson County. And all I've done is basically just like selected these randomly. Uh, the bottom and top chart are the same. The only difference is the bottom chart is shown year over year. So what this indicates to me is that more or less the average household size for a lot of these markets had been uh, outright declining, or the growth rate had been slowing in a lot of these markets. And it looked like the average household size was trying to reverse and go higher around 2019 and 2020. Okay. But then we had all that COVID stimulus, and all of a sudden, the average household size reignited that downtrend in most markets. Now, as you can see, the rate of change is not the same in all of them, but the general pattern, the general trend is lower. So that, again, follows the economic cycle. And and I want to make this very clear, this could, in theory, account for a tight housing market, especially if you're in the market to buy a home, if you have a scenario when household growth is is outpacing population growth. You see how that works? And so I'll give you an example. Let's say recent college grad, he's been living with his folks up until now, but he's finally got a job and he's now able to go out and afford his own condo. So he goes out and he buys a condo. Well, the population has not changed in that scenario, but you have one additional household that's been formed. You see how that works? Population didn't change, but the number of households changed. You now have one incremental, one person owner occupied household. Because remember, he in theory bought a condo. So he's a condo owner, he's a home owner. So let's look at this, basically this same data, but just for Davidson County and how that distribution looks over time. So in other words, the household size distribution by renter occupied and owner occupied for Davidson County. Now, these charts, top and bottom, are the same chart. The only difference is how the visual was configured. The top chart is a line graph. Bottom chart is a stacked bar chart graph. Okay, so we can see that in the aggregate, if you look at the bottom chart, the number of occupied units is been growing pretty significantly since 2010. Well, what has been growing significantly? Really, when I look at that top chart, renter occupied one person households jumps off the page at me. But you can also see that one person and two person owner occupied households has also been growing at a pretty decent clip. So, owner occupied here, again, I think it's intuitive, is in blue, renter occupied in red. The darker color saturation is going to indicate a smaller household size. And so that's meant to sort of draw your attention to that relationship. So you understand there's several different ways of looking at it. And we haven't even gotten to basically an iteration like that looks at this based on age ranges or the type of household that it may be. So could it be non-family households? Could it be family households? What do the family households look like? Do they look like married couples? Maybe it's a female where the spouse isn't present and they have a child living with them. All of these things get measured, and they're all very important considerations when you're looking at things like demographics. So let's add some more context to this. As I alluded to earlier, the housing stock for any area in the country consists of three buckets. Well, people define it different ways. There's two sort of high level buckets. It's occupied units and vacant, but I like to break it out. I like to break out the occupied units by whether or not it's owner or renter occupied. So, which is what I've done here for Davidson County, up top. And below, I'm actually showing the distribution of rents relative to incomes for Davidson County and how that has changed over time. Um, just so you get an idea of all of these different data points that we can look at and we can say, well, am I really looking at this adequately? Like, for example, when I look at the top chart of the housing stock, and again, this is the aggregate housing stock. This isn't what's for sale. This is the entire stock of homes. If it was for sale, all it's going to be representative of is the blue, right? You're in the market to buy something. You're not in the market to rent something. So that's how I think about looking at any sort of market. And this is why I think it's really inappropriate for people to think about renting and buying separately, because they're not separate. At any geographical level, people have the option to rent or buy. Right now, it makes way more sense to rent than to buy. The math just does not work. So, I've definitely hit on this in other videos. I mean, you're seeing in real time, because when I'm showing this information, I know that these are annual data points and it's only through 2022. But I can promise you that we can sort of verify whether or not these patterns or trends are still holding if you look at more real-time data. Like, for example, rent vacancy rates, which we know are extremely high from a historical standpoint in Davidson County, which puts downward pressure on rent prices. Basically, if a building is empty, then the landlord's going to have to reduce the price to create demand. And that's a whole, I can get into that in another video, and the nuance that comes with the whole rental space. But again, it's just confirming these trends that we're seeing in the demographic data. Okay. Um, Let me jump over to just some real estate sales data. Like, this is from Redfin. And I look at this and I go, okay, well, homes sold are pretty low historically. They're still in a downtrend, which makes sense why inventory is rising. And when you look at the chart below, you can actually see the sales price seems to be diverging from the list price. So you have a demand problem. So we not only, as I've shown you thus far, we not only have a demand problem for renter occupied homes, but we also have a demand problem from owner occupied homes. So you see how important it is to pair not only the demographics with sort of transaction sales data, but also with things that you know I haven't even fully gotten into yet, but things like the current labor market conditions and how that can impact all of these things. To suggest that those things are not part of the equation is just incredibly short-sighted. And if there's somebody out there, a housing analyst or what have you, who is only focusing on, you know, the transactional, you know, home ownership sort of data, well, as I've just shown you, I mean, I want to say like 46% of occupied homes in Davidson County are renter occupied. Okay, so that only reflects 54% of the occupied housing stock in Davidson County. So it lacks context, is what I'm trying to say. Um, so, I mean, again, that's how I like to think about demographics, how important they are. I have a lot of other cuts of this data that I look at, and I look at it at scale. I think that's the only way that you should be looking at this. That was the point of showing you the average household size chart. We can just sort of jump back to this real quick. Um, but you see how you need to be like comparing these things across markets, because you don't want to necessarily extrapolate some anomaly that you're only seeing in your local market. When you look at this information at scale and you put it all together and you make it talk, you get a much clearer idea as to the general direction and trend of what's happening and why this demographic data, in addition to these other factors that we've already considered, are really important to sort of evaluating any housing market in the country. So, yeah, I mean, I hope that helps. If there is a particular market that you would like me to cover really in depth, and I can flesh out more of, you know, the demographic stuff, even the labor stuff, uh, even the, you know, real estate sales data, we can do that because it's all there. I have all this stuff, and we can make sense of it, but just be very cautious in terms of listening to some of these analysts talking about trends that they're seeing in their market, and they're not really giving you context. That's what I want you to take away from this video, is that there are so many considerations when it comes to all things housing that it is easily doable for somebody to spin the narrative and confuse you. So, all right, guys, that's all I got. Appreciate your time.